Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing could cost you everything? Maybe you're watching this from a city where danger lurks in unexpected places, where one choice can change your entire life. If you're in Chicago, New York, or anywhere where the nightlife hides secrets, you'll understand what happened to Isadora that night. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to make a split-second decision that changed everything. The amber liquid in the crystal tumbler looked perfect. Too perfect. Isadora Chun wiped down the mahogany bar for the third time in 5 minutes, her dark eyes tracking every movement in the upscale Chicago establishment where she'd worked double shifts for the past 2 years. At 24, she'd learned to read people quickly. Drunk businessmen who grabbed, lonely wives who overshared, college kids with fake IDs who thought they were clever. But tonight felt different. Electric, dangerous in a way that made her stomach clench with unease. The regular who'd ordered the expensive whiskey sat at the far end of the bar, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. Marcus something, she thought his name was. Investment banker, always tipped well, never caused trouble. Tonight, he kept checking his phone, glancing toward the entrance, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. When he'd slipped something small into the Macallan 25 while her back was turned, Isadora had felt her world tilt sideways. She should mind her own business. Keep her head down, serve drinks, collect tips, go home to count the money that would inch her closer to culinary school. Closer to a life where she didn't smell like other people's alcohol every night. Closer to affording her mother's treatments without choosing between medicine and rent. Her phone buzzed against her hip. A text from the hospital. Her mother's condition was stable, but the bills kept mounting. The experimental treatment they discussed wasn't covered by insurance. $62,000. Might as well be 60 million. Isadora closed her eyes briefly, then opened them to see Marcus sliding the crystal tumbler toward the center of the bar. Away from himself, positioning it for someone else. Someone who didn't know they were about to drink poison. The front door opened with a soft chime, and the atmosphere in the room shifted like a predator had entered a herd of prey. Conversations quieted. Heads turned, then quickly looked away. Even a background jazz seemed to lower in volume. The man who walked in commanded attention without trying. Tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair styled impeccably despite the late hour. His suit was clearly expensive, tailored to perfection. The kind that cost more than Isadora made in 3 months. But it wasn't the clothes that made her pulse quicken. It was the way he moved. Confident. Controlled. Like he owned not just the room, but everything in it. His eyes swept the space with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to danger. Green-gray eyes that missed nothing. When his gaze landed on her, Isadora felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with an attraction so immediate and intense it stole her breath. He approached the bar with fluid grace, sliding onto the stool directly in front of her. The space between them felt charged, intimate despite the marble countertop separating them. "Good evening," he said, his voice rich and smooth with just a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. Something warm and distinctly masculine that made her think of expensive wine and whispered secrets. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Isadora felt heat climb her neck. "What can I get you?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the way her hands wanted to tremble. Macallan 25. Neat. Isadora's blood turned to ice. The poison glass sat 3 feet away, amber liquid gleaming innocently under the soft lighting. Marcus had positioned it perfectly, close enough that she could slide it over without suspicion, far enough that if questioned later, he could claim ignorance. She glanced at Marcus, who was watching intently, his earlier nervousness replaced by focused attention. His hand rested casually near his jacket, and for the first time, Isadora noticed the slight bulge that suggested a weapon. Her mind raced. Call the police? By the time they arrived, this man would be dead. Refuse to serve him? Marcus might get suspicious. Create a distraction? Too risky. The stranger waited patiently, those green-gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that suggested he missed very little. There was something almost familiar about him, though Isadora was certain they'd never met. She would have remembered those eyes, that presence. "I'll have that right up for you," she said, reaching for a clean glass instead of the poison one. Her hand shook as she poured fresh whiskey. This was insane. She was a bartender, not a hero. She served drinks and minded her own business. That's how she stayed safe, how she kept her job, how she paid her mother's medical bills. But as she set the glass in front of him and saw him reach for it, something inside her rebelled. She couldn't watch someone die, not when she could prevent it. Quickly, before she could lose her nerve, Isadora grabbed a cocktail napkin and scrawled a message in her neat handwriting. "Don't drink it. Act normal and leave." Now, she folded the napkin and slid it across the bar with steady hands that belied her racing heart. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and the contact sent fire up her arm. He didn't look down at the note immediately, instead maintaining eye contact while raising the glass toward his lips. Isadora's breath caught in her throat. "Read it," she willed silently. "Please just read it." He paused, perhaps sensing her tension, and glanced down at the napkin. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A subtle alertness that suggested he was taking her warning seriously. Instead of setting down the glass and leaving as she'd hoped, he did something that made her heart stop entirely. He reached across the bar and grabbed her hand. His grip was firm but gentle, his skin warm against her suddenly cold fingers. When he looked up at her again, those green-gray eyes held a depth of understanding that made her knees weak. "Who?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the jazz music. The single word carried weight, authority, and something that sounded like barely controlled violence. This wasn't a man who would run from danger. This was a man who faced it head-in and usually won. Isadora's mouth went dry. She thought she was saving his life. Instead, she might have to start a war. Before she could respond, Marcus's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Problem here, Torino?" The name hit Isadora like a physical blow. Torino, as in the Torino family, as in Chicago organized crime, as in the man whose hand currently covered hers was probably the most dangerous person in the room. Valentino Torino's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "No problem at all, Marcus. Just enjoying the company of this lovely bartender." His thumb stroked across her knuckles, a gesture that would have seemed romantic in any other context. Here, with tension crackling between the two men like electricity before a storm, it felt like a claiming. A declaration. Marcus's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "Maybe you should drink up and head out. Long day tomorrow, I'm sure." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Valentino's grip on Isadora's hand tightened almost imperceptibly, and she realized with growing horror that she was now in the middle of whatever deadly game these men were playing. "Actually," Valentino said, his voice deceptively casual, "I think I'll stay a while longer. This whiskey is exceptional." He lifted the glass she'd poured him, not the poison one, and took a slow sip while never breaking eye contact with Marcus. "And the service here is remarkable." Marcus's hand moved toward his jacket, and Isadora saw her life flash before her eyes. Her mother in the hospital, alone. Her dreams of culinary school, forever unrealized. The peaceful life she'd tried so hard to build, about to be destroyed by one moment of conscience. That's when the first gunshot shattered the night. Glass exploded behind the bar as Marcus drew his weapon, but Valentino was already moving. He launched himself across the marble countertop, tackling Isadora to the floor behind the bar as bullets flew overhead. The weight of his body covered hers completely, protective and warm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Stay down," he commanded, his breath hot against her ear. More gunshots, screaming, the sound of overturned tables and running feet. Isadora pressed her face against the cool tile floor and tried not to think about how solid and reassuring Valentino felt pressed against her back. Try not to notice how he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely masculine that made her want to breathe deeper despite the terror. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun, replaced by an ominous crackling sound that made Valentino curse in what sounded like Italian. "Fire!" he said grimly, pulling her to her feet. "We need to move. Now." Smoke was already beginning to fill the space behind the bar. Through the haze, Isadora could see flames licking at the expensive curtains, spreading faster than seemed possible. Someone had used accelerant. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was meant to destroy all evidence. Valentino's arm wrapped around her waist, strong and sure as he guided her through the smoke toward the emergency exit she'd used countless times during her shifts. But the handle wouldn't turn. Locked from the outside. "This way," he said, changing direction toward the kitchen. They stumbled through the swinging doors into the stainless steel workspace Isadora knew by heart. The fire hadn't reached here yet, but smoke poured in from the dining room, making her eyes water and her lungs burn. "Window," she gasped, pointing toward the small opening near the dishwashing station. Too small for him, but she could fit. Valentino didn't hesitate. He boosted her up, his hands steady on her waist as she struggled with the ancient latch. Behind them, something exploded in the main dining room, and heat rolled over them like a physical force. The window finally gave way, and Isadora tumbled through onto the narrow alley behind the restaurant. She rolled to her feet, turning back to help Valentino, but the opening was too small for his broad shoulders. "Go!" he shouted through the smoke. "Get away from the building." Instead of running, Isadora found herself moving toward the front of the building, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't leave him. Wouldn't leave him. Not after he'd protected her. She rounded the corner to see Valentino emerging from the main entrance, his expensive suit torn and dirty, a cut bleeding on his forehead. The moment he saw her, relief flooded his features, quickly followed by something that looked like admiration. "You should have run," he said as he reached her, his hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "So should you," she replied, not caring that her voice shook. Behind them, the building that had housed her job, her income, her future, burned against the Chicago night sky. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Valentino's thumbs stroked across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. His green-gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made everything else fade away. The fire, the sirens, the curious crowd gathering across the street. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Isadora. Isadora Chun." He smiled then, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him all evening. "Well, Isadora Chun, you just saved my life. The question is, what am I going to do about yours?" Before she could ask what he meant, the world tilted sideways. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last few minutes finally crashed, and darkness swallowed her whole. The last thing she remembered was the feeling of strong arms catching her as she fell, and a voice like warm honey promising that everything would be all right. Isadora woke to the softest sheets she'd ever felt against her skin and a view of Chicago that belonged in a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across an entire wall, revealing the city spread out below like scattered diamonds against black velvet. The skyline was breathtaking, but wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. Her apartment had a view of the dumpster behind the building next door. Memory crashed back in waves. The bar, the poisoned drink, gunfire, the building burning while strong arms carried her to safety. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning as she took in her surroundings. The bedroom was enormous, decorated in muted grays and rich blues that screamed expensive taste. The bed she was lying in could have fit her entire studio apartment. Where the hell was she? The door opened as if summoned by her thoughts, and Valentino stepped inside, carrying a steaming mug that smelled like heaven. He'd changed out of his ruined suit into dark jeans and a black cashmere sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders and made his green-gray eyes even more striking. Without the formal wear, he looked younger, more approachable, but no less dangerous. "You're awake," he said, setting the mug on the nightstand beside her. "How do you feel?" "Confused," Isadora replied honestly. "And terrified. Where am I?" "My home." He settled into the chair beside the bed, maintaining enough distance that she didn't feel trapped, but close enough that she could see the concern in his expression. "You've been unconscious for about 6 hours." "Shocked," the doctor said. Perfectly normal after what you went through. Doctor? Panic flared in her chest. I can't afford a doctor. I don't have insurance that covers house calls, and my mother's medical bills are already. It's handled, Valentino interrupted gently. Dr. Castellano is a family friend. She looked you over while you were out, said you have some minor smoke inhalation, but nothing serious. No charge. Family friend. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Isadora's stomach clench. She'd heard the name Marcus had used at the bar. Torino. In Chicago, that name meant organized crime. It meant violence and territory wars and the kind of power that came from fear. Who are you? She whispered, though she already knew the answer would change everything. Valentino leaned back in his chair, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. My name is Valentino Torino. I run the family business here in Chicago. Import and export primarily. Some real estate investments. Entertainment venues. The careful way he phrased it, the slight pause before each euphemism, told her everything he wasn't saying. Import and export meant smuggling. Real estate investments meant money laundering. Entertainment venues meant fronts for illegal gambling and worse. You're Mafia, she said flatly. I prefer a businessman with flexible ethics. The slight smile that curved his lips was both charming and terrifying. But yes, if you want to be crude about it. Isadora pulled the expensive sheets up to her chin, suddenly aware that someone had changed her clothes while she was unconscious. She was wearing silk pajamas that definitely weren't hers, in a soft lavender that probably cost more than her rent. The thought of him undressing her, while she was helpless, sent heat flooding through her that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the memory of his hands on her face, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious. That was insane. He was a criminal. She needed to leave, get as far away from him as possible, go back to her quiet life of serving drinks and saving money and keeping her head down. I need to go home, she said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. I need to check on my mother, and I have to find another job, and you can't go home, Valentino said quietly. The words stopped her cold. Your apartment was ransacked about 3 hours ago. They were looking for something, or someone. The world tilted again. Her apartment? Her few precious belongings, her mother's photos, the small jewelry box that had been her grandmother's? What about my mother? The question came out as a whisper. Safe. Valentino's voice was gentle but firm. I had her moved to a private room at Northwestern Memorial. Better security, better doctors. She's being told you're helping with a police investigation and need to stay in protective custody for a few days. Relief and rage warred in Isadora's chest. Relief that her mother was safe, rage that her life had been turned upside down because she tried to do the right thing. She thought about the experimental treatment her mother needed, the stack of medical bills on her kitchen counter, the careful budget she'd planned that would have taken 3 years to save enough money. All that was gone now. Her job, her apartment security deposit, her sense of safety. Everything destroyed in one night because she couldn't watch a stranger die. This is insane, she said, standing on shaky legs. I warned you about the drink. That should have been the end of it. I shouldn't be involved in whatever war you're fighting with Marcus or whoever wants you dead. Valentino stood as well, his movement fluid and predatory in a way that reminded her exactly how dangerous he was. Marcus Kellerman worked for the Dimitrov family. They've been trying to move into our territory for months. Last night was their opening move in what they hope will be a war. I don't care about your territory disputes, Isadora snapped. I just want my life back. Your life back? Valentino's voice hardened, losing all traces of the gentleness she'd heard earlier. Cara mia, your life was forfeit the moment you slipped me that note. The Dimitrovs don't leave loose ends. They'll assume you know something that could implicate them. They'll come for you whether you want to be involved or not. The endearment sent an unwelcome shiver through her. Cara mia, my dear, spoken in that rich voice with just a hint of accent, it sounded like a caress. So what are you suggesting? That I hide here forever? I'm suggesting you let me protect you while I handle the Dimitrov problem permanently. His green-gray eyes held hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just determination, but genuine concern. Actual caring for someone he'd known less than 24 hours. And why would you do that? What do you get out of protecting a stranger? You saved my life, he said simply. That means something in my world. It means everything. The sincerity in his voice was almost harder to bear than the danger. Isadora had spent years taking care of herself and her mother, trusting no one, depending on no one. The idea that someone might actually want to help her without expecting something in return was foreign enough to be terrifying. A phone rang, interrupting the charged moment between them. Valentino answered with a crisp yes, then listened for nearly a minute without speaking. Isadora watched his expression grow darker with each passing second. I see, he said finally. Make sure the scene is contained. No witnesses, no evidence. And find out how they knew where to look. He ended the call and looked at Isadora with something that might have been pity. What now? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. They hit your mother's apartment too, and the hospital tried to discharge her an hour ago. Someone called claiming to be you, saying you were coming to pick her up for a family emergency. Ice filled Isadora's veins. If Valentino hadn't moved her mother, if she'd been at her own apartment when these people came looking, they would have taken her, Valentino confirmed, reading her expression. Used her to get to you. The only reason she's safe is because my people got there first. Isadora sank back onto the bed, overwhelmed. Her mother could have been kidnapped, tortured, killed, all because Isadora had tried to save a stranger's life. I'm sorry, Valentino said, and the genuine regret in his voice almost broke her. I'm sorry your kindness put you in this position. But now that you're here, I swear to you, nothing will happen to you or your mother while you're under my protection. How long? The question came out rough, strained. However long it takes to eliminate the threat. Days, weeks, maybe longer. The thought of staying here, in this luxurious prison with this dangerous, compelling man, made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. The memory of his hands on her face, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, the protective fury in his voice when he talked about threats to her safety. She was attracted to him, powerfully, irresistibly attracted to a man who probably had blood on his hands. A man whose world was violence and territory wars and the kind of power that came from inspiring fear. What if I say no? What if I take my chances on my own? Valentino's smile was sharp and entirely without humor. Then you'll be dead within 48 hours, and your mother shortly after. The Dimitrovs don't forgive, and they don't forget. So it wasn't really a choice at all. Isadora looked out at the city lights again, trying to process how completely her life had changed in a single night. This morning, she'd been a bartender with dreams of culinary school and a carefully planned budget. Tonight, she was under the protection of a Mafia boss, sleeping in silk pajamas that cost more than her monthly salary. What happens to my mother's treatment? She asked quietly. She needs specialized care, experimental medication that costs thousands of dollars a month. Handled, Valentino said immediately. Dr. Castellano is coordinating with her oncologist. Whatever she needs, for as long as she needs it. Isadora's head snapped up. I can't let you pay for her medical care. That's too much. I don't have any way to repay that kind of money. You saved my life, he repeated. In my world, that creates a debt that can never be fully repaid. Let me take care of her medical expenses. Please. The please, soft and almost vulnerable, undid her completely. Here was one of the most dangerous men in Chicago, asking for permission to help her. The contradiction between his reputation and his gentleness toward her was making her head spin. Okay, she whispered, hating how her voice shook. Okay, I'll stay. Until the threat is over. Valentino's relief was visible, the tension leaving his shoulders as he nodded. Thank you. You won't regret trusting me, I promise. He moved toward the door, then paused. Are you hungry? It's past dinner time, and you haven't eaten since before the bar. Actually, Isadora realized she was starving. The stress and fear had suppressed her appetite until now, but the smell of whatever he'd brought in that mug was making her stomach growl audibly. What do you like? He asked. I can have anything delivered. Or? He hesitated, looking almost shy. I could cook something, if you're not too tired. The idea of this powerful, dangerous man cooking for her was so unexpected that she almost smiled despite everything. "You cook?" "Italian grandmother," he said with the first genuine grin she'd seen from him. She made sure all her grandsons could feed themselves properly. Said any man who couldn't cook wasn't worth a woman's time. The glimpse of normalcy, of family traditions and childhood memories, made him seem human in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. It would be easier if he were just a monster. Easier to keep her distance, to remember that this was temporary. "I'd like that," she heard herself saying. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all, cara mia." His voice had gone soft again, warm in a way that made her stomach flutter. "Rest for a little while longer. I'll let you know when it's ready." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Isadora buried her face in her hands and tried to make sense of what her life had become. She was essentially a prisoner, dependent on the protection of a man she'd known for less than a day. A man who was everything she'd been taught to fear and avoid. But when she closed her eyes, all she could remember was the way he'd thrown himself over her when the shooting started, protecting her body with his own. The way he'd caught her when she fainted, holding her like she was something precious. The genuine concern in his voice when he talked about her safety. Maybe she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But as the smell of garlic and herbs began to drift from the kitchen, and she heard the sounds of someone cooking with obvious skill and care, Isadora found herself thinking that if this was a mistake, it might be the most interesting one she'd ever made. Isadora woke to the smell of fresh coffee and something that made her mouth water. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the events that had brought her to this impossibly soft bed with its view of the Chicago skyline. Then reality crashed back, along with the realization that she'd slept better in this stranger's guest room than she had in months. The silk pajamas she wore whispered against the sheets as she sat up, running her hands through her hair. Someone had left clothes folded neatly on the chair beside the bed. Jeans in her exact size, a soft cashmere sweater in deep blue, undergarments that were probably more expensive than her entire wardrobe. The thoughtfulness of it, the attention to detail, made something warm unfurl in her chest. She found Valentino in the kitchen, and the sight of him stopped her in her tracks. Gone was the dangerous businessman from last night. This version wore faded jeans that hugged his hips perfectly and a simple white button-down with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He moved around the modern kitchen with practiced ease, flipping what looked like perfect crepes while simultaneously monitoring something on the stove. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was warm enough to melt her resistance completely. "Good morning, Carmia. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted, then immediately regretted the honesty. It felt too intimate, too revealing. "Good. Coffee?" He nodded toward a machine that probably cost more than her monthly salary. "Please." Isadora accepted the mug he handed her, inhaling the rich aroma. The first sip was heaven, dark and smooth with just a hint of something that made it extraordinary. "This is amazing. Italian roast. My grandmother's blend." Valentino turned back to the stove, and Isadora found herself watching the way his shoulders moved beneath the thin cotton, the confident grace of his movements. She'd worked in enough restaurants to recognize real skill when she saw it, and he clearly knew his way around kitchen. "You weren't kidding about the cooking thing," she said. Nana would roll over in her grave if any of her grandsons couldn't feed a woman properly. He plated the crepes with berries and what looked like mascarpone cheese, the presentation restaurant quality. She used to say that food was love made visible. The casual mention of his grandmother, the obvious affection in his voice, made him seem human again. It was easier when she could think of him as just a dangerous stranger. Harder when she saw glimpses of the man beneath the reputation. They ate in comfortable silence at the island, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making everything seem surreal. Isadora had never eaten breakfast in a penthouse, had never owned silk pajamas, had never been protected by a man who could probably have her killed with a phone call. "Tell me about your family," Valentino said suddenly. Isadora nearly choked on her coffee. "What? Your family. You mentioned your mother last night. Tell me about her. The genuine interest in his voice caught her off guard. She was used to men who asked questions as a prelude to getting her into bed, not because they actually wanted to know her answers. She's everything, Isadora said quietly. After my father left when I was 12, it was just us. She worked 3 jobs to put me through school, never complained, never made me feel like I was a burden, even though I know I was. When she got sick 2 years ago, she trailed off, not sure how to explain the desperate fear that had consumed her life since the diagnosis. What kind of sick? Valentino's voice was gentle, encouraging. Breast cancer. Aggressive. The doctors caught it early, but the treatments are expensive, and now it's spread. There's an experimental therapy that might help, but insurance won't cover it. How much? The blunt question made her look up. 60,000 for the full treatment cycle. Might as well be 60 million. Valentino nodded thoughtfully, as if $60,000 was pocket change. Which, for him, it probably was. What about your father? Do you still see him? Isadora's laugh was bitter. He left the day after my 12th birthday. Said he couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. Haven't heard from him since. I'm sorry, Valentino said, and something in his tone made her believe he really was. A man who abandons his family is no man at all. The quiet fury in his voice surprised her. She'd learned not to expect outrage on her behalf, had stopped hoping someone would share her anger at her father's abandonment. What about you? She asked, deflecting from the painful topic. Big family? Complicated family. Valentino's smile was rueful. My father died when I was 19. Heart attack, the doctor said, but in our world, you never know for sure. I inherited everything overnight. The businesses, the responsibilities, the enemies. 19. Isadora tried to imagine being thrust into a position of such power and danger at that age. How do you handle that kind of pressure? You learn fast, or you don't survive. He met her eyes across the small table. I learned that family is everything, that loyalty is earned, not demanded, and that sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. Before Isadora could respond, the sound of the elevator opening echoed through the penthouse. Valentino was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor shifting from relaxed to alert in a heartbeat. Stay here, he said quietly, moving toward the living area. Isadora heard voices, male and distinctly deferential. After a moment, Valentino returned with 2 people who looked like they belonged in completely different worlds. The man was probably in his late 20s, lean and sharp-eyed with the kind of controlled energy that suggested violence was always an option. The woman was older, maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun and the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. Isadora, meet Nico Rossi, my lieutenant, and Dr. Sofia Castellano. Nico handles security. Dr. Castellano has been looking after your mother. Nico nodded politely but kept his distance, clearly more comfortable with boundaries. Dr. Castellano stepped forward with a warm smile that immediately put Isadora at ease. Ms. Chun, it's wonderful to meet you properly. Your mother is doing very well. I've reviewed her medical files with her oncologist, and we've adjusted her treatment plan slightly. The new medications should help with the pain. Thank you, Isadora said, meaning it. How is she handling being moved? She's worried about you, of course, but she's comfortable. I told her you're helping with a police investigation and needed to be in protective custody for a few days. The casual way Dr. Castellano delivered the lie made Isadora wonder how often she provided alibis for Valentino's activities. But her concern for Isadora's mother seemed genuine, professional. Boss, Nico said quietly. We need to talk. Valentino glanced at Isadora, clearly torn between including her and protecting her from whatever news Nico had brought. It's about the Dimitrovs, isn't it? Isadora asked. I should hear this. It's my life they're trying to destroy. After a moment, Valentino nodded. Tell us what you found. Nico pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like surveillance photos. The hit on the bar was definitely them. Marcus Kellerman was working with Viktor Dimitrov's youngest son, Pavel. Word is they're trying to force a territory war, make you look weak so they can justify moving into Little Italy. How many men? Valentino's voice had gone cold, businesslike. At least a dozen involved in last night's operation. They've been recruiting from outside the city, bringing in muscle that doesn't know our faces. Dr. Castellano excused herself quietly, pressing Isadora's hand briefly before leaving. Clearly, this wasn't the first time she'd made herself scarce during business discussions. There's more, Nico continued. Pavel Dimitrov wants a meeting. Tonight. Says he has a proposal that might avoid further bloodshed. It's a trap, Isadora said before she could stop herself. Both men looked at her with surprise. I mean, after what they tried last night, why would they suddenly want to negotiate? Valentino's smile was sharp with approval. Exactly what I was thinking. What else? Nico glanced between them, clearly wondering about the dynamic he was witnessing. They want neutral ground. The old warehouse district, Pier 15. Just you and one man. Absolutely not, Isadora found herself saying. That's suicide. Valentino turned to her, his expression unreadable. You think I should refuse? I think you should bring half your army and meet them somewhere you control. The words tumbled out before she could filter them. These are the same people who try to poison you and burn down a building with innocent people inside. They don't deserve good faith. Nico was staring at her now with something that might have been respect. She's got a point, boss. Victor's son isn't known for his honor. Set up a meeting, Valentino said after a moment. But not their terms. The restaurant on 5th Street, Tuesday evening. Public, familiar territory, plenty of exits. And backup? Nico asked. Full team, but invisible. Let them think I'm being reasonable. After Nico left, Isadora found herself alone with Valentino again. He was studying her with an intensity that made her squirm. What? She asked. You have good instincts. Most people in your situation would be begging me to just give the Dimitrovs whatever they want to make this go away. Maybe I'm not most people, she said, then immediately wondered where that confidence had come from. No, Valentino agreed, moving closer. You're definitely not. The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. Isadora could smell his cologne, could see the faint scar along his jawline that she hadn't noticed before. His green-gray eyes were focused on her mouth, and she realized she was breathing too fast. Isadora, he said softly. Yes? Instead of answering, he reached up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. She should step away. Should remember that this was temporary, that she didn't belong in his dangerous world, that getting involved with him would be the stupidest thing she'd ever done. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as he lowered his head toward hers. His phone rang, sharp and insistent, shattering the moment completely. Valentino cursed in Italian, stepping back as he answered. Yes. His voice was clipped, professional, but Isadora could see the frustration in his eyes. I understand. No, handle it quietly. I'll be there in an hour. Business? She asked when he hung up. Always. He looked genuinely regretful. I have to go out for a few hours. Nico will stay with you. Don't leave the building. The command rankled, but she could see the concern behind it. What if I get claustrophobic? Valentino smiled, some of his earlier warmth returning. Then we'll have to make sure you have everything you need. Would you like to go shopping? New clothes, whatever you want. The idea of shopping with Mafia money should have bothered her more than it did. I don't have any way to pay you back. You saved my life, he repeated, as if that settled everything. Let me take care of you, cara mia. Please. The please undid her completely, just as it had the night before. Fine, she said, but nothing too expensive. His laugh was rich and warm. Tesoro, you have no idea what expensive looks like yet. 2 hours later, sitting in the back of a luxury car with Nico and 2 other men whose job was clearly her protection, Isadora was beginning to understand what Valentino had meant. The boutiques they visited had price tags that made her dizzy, but Nico simply handed over a black card whenever she looked at something for more than a few seconds. You don't have to buy everything I touch, she told him after the 4th store. Boss's orders, Nico replied with a slight smile. Whatever makes you happy. The casual way he said it, the assumption that Valentino would want her happy, sent warmth spreading through her chest. She was getting used to being cared for, and that terrified her more than any external threat. That evening, cooking dinner together in Valentino's enormous kitchen, Isadora found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. He moved around her with unconscious grace, occasionally brushing against her as he reached for ingredients, and each casual touch sent electricity through her nervous system. "Tell me about your dreams," he said as they worked side by side preparing what he called a simple pasta dish, but looked like something from a five-star restaurant. "Dreams? Before all this, what did you want your life to look like?" Isadora considered lying, giving him the safe answer about financial security and stability. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "I wanted to go to culinary school. Open my own restaurant someday, something small and intimate where food was about bringing people together, making them feel cared for." "Why didn't you?" "Money. Mom's medical bills. Life getting in the way." She shrugged, trying to make it sound like it didn't matter, like she hadn't mourned the death of that dream every day for 2 years. "What kind of restaurant?" Valentino's voice was carefully neutral. "Something that felt like home. Good food, honest ingredients, the kind of place where regulars knew they'd always be welcomed." She paused, then added quietly, "The kind of place I never had growing up." Valentino stopped chopping garlic and turned to look at her. "You could still do that. After this is over." "With what money?" "The treatments for my mother will wipe out any savings, and now I don't even have a job." "Money can be handled," he said simply. "Dreams are harder to replace." The casual way he dismissed the financial obstacles that had seemed insurmountable made her head spin. In his world, $60,000 for her mother's treatment was nothing. Her restaurant dream was probably pocket change. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Help me, I mean. You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," he said quietly. "And more than that, He stopped, seeming to search for words. "You make me remember what it feels like to want something beyond survival and power." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Isadora felt herself falling, tumbling towards something that would change everything. And for the first time since this all began, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop herself. Valentino's phone buzzed against the counter, and his expression darkened as he read the message. "What is it?" she asked. "Pavel Dimitrov. He's moved up the meeting to tomorrow night. Says he's tired of waiting." Isadora's blood ran cold. "That's not good, is it?" "No, cara mia. It's not good at all." The next evening arrived too quickly, bringing with it a tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the penthouse. Isadora watched from the enormous windows as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of amber and deep red that reminded her uncomfortably of the fire that had destroyed her old life. Valentino emerged from his bedroom, wearing a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made his green-gray eyes look storm-dark. He was checking his phone, his movements sharp and precise in a way that told her his mind was already focused on the dangerous meeting ahead. "You don't have to go," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Send someone else. Send Nico." He looked up, and something in his expression softened at her obvious worry. "I can't ask my men to take risks I won't take myself. That's not how leadership works in my world." "Your world seems determined to get you killed," she replied, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "Sometimes." Valentino crossed to where she stood by the windows, his hands coming up to rest gently on her shoulders. "But I've been navigating these waters since I was 19. I know how to handle the Dimitrovs." The casual confidence in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her stomach clench with fear she had no right to feel. She'd known this man for 3 days. 3 days. She shouldn't care this much about his safety, shouldn't feel like her heart was being carved out of her chest at the thought of him walking into danger. "What happens if it goes wrong?" she asked quietly. "It won't. But what if it does?" Valentino's thumbs stroked across her collarbones, the gentle touch at odds with the deadly purpose in his eyes. "Then Nico has instructions to get you and your mother out of the city. New identities, enough money to start over anywhere you want." The matter-of-fact way he discussed contingency plans for his own death made her feel sick. "You've thought this through." "I always think it through. It's how I've survived this long." His voice was gentle patient, as if he were explaining something obvious to a child. But cara mia, I have something to come home to now. That changes everything. The admission hit her like a physical blow. Something to come home to. He meant her. After 3 days, she'd become important enough to factor into his survival calculations. Valentino, she started, not sure what she wanted to say. I know, he said softly. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. But I've never felt anything like this before, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, lingering just long enough for her to breathe in his scent, to memorize the warmth of his lips against her skin. I'll be back in a few hours, he promised. Nico and 2 others will be here. Don't answer the door for anyone else. Don't go near the windows. And if anything feels wrong, hit the panic button by the elevator. The panic button, as if her life had become the kind of thing that required panic buttons. Be careful, she whispered. Always am. His smile was meant to be reassuring, but she could see the tension underneath it, the knowledge that tonight could change everything. After he left, the penthouse felt enormous and empty. Nico stationed himself by the elevator while the other 2 men took positions she couldn't see but somehow knew were there. She tried to read, tried to watch television, tried anything that would distract her from the clock on the wall that seemed to be moving with deliberate slowness. At 10:30, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your boyfriend's meeting didn't go as planned. Check the news. Isadora's blood turned to ice. She grabbed the remote with shaking hands, cycling through news channels until she found what she was looking for. The reporter was standing outside what looked like a restaurant, police cars and ambulances scattered behind her. Breaking news from downtown Chicago, where shooting at Romano's restaurant has left several injured and at least 1 person dead. Police aren't releasing details yet, but sources confirm this appears to be gang-related violence. The remote slipped from Isadora's numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Several injured. At least 1 person dead. The restaurant where Valentino had gone to meet Pavel Dimitrov. Nico, she called, her voice coming out strange and high. He appeared instantly, taking one look at her face and the television screen before cursing in what sounded like Italian. His phone was already in his hand, dialing. Boss, he said when someone answered. Thank Christ. Are you hurt? The news is saying. I see. How bad? Okay, we're secure here. See you soon. He hung up and looked at Isadora with something that might have been sympathy. He's alive. Wounded but alive. Pavel Dimitrov is dead. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. Alive. Valentino was alive. But wounded. How badly wounded? He wouldn't say, Nico admitted. But he's coming back here instead of going to a hospital, so it can't be that serious. Or he didn't trust the hospitals. Or the wound was serious enough that he needed Dr. Castellano instead of emergency room questions. Isadora's imagination supplied a dozen terrible possibilities. She paced the living room like a caged animal, unable to sit still, unable to focus on anything except the clock and the knowledge that every minute that passed was another minute he could be bleeding, dying, alone. At 11:47, the private elevator dinged softly. Isadora was moving before the doors opened completely, stopping short when she saw Valentino leaning heavily against Nico's shoulder, his shirt torn and bloody, a makeshift bandage around his upper left arm. You said he wasn't seriously hurt, she accused Nico. Compared to being dead, this is a flesh wound, Valentino said dryly, though his voice was strained. Pavel brought a gun to what was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting. Poor form, really. Despite everything, Isadora almost smiled. Trust him to maintain his sense of humor while bleeding. Dr. Castellano is on her way, Nico said, helping Valentino to the couch. 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like forever. Isadora found herself hovering, wanting to help but not knowing how. The blood on his shirt kept drawing her attention, making her stomach clench with a fear that felt entirely too personal. Stop looking at me like I'm dying, cara mia, Valentino said softly. I've had worse cuts shaving. You don't shave your arm, she replied automatically, then felt her cheeks heat at his surprised laugh. True. Come here. She moved closer, and he reached out with his good arm to pull her down onto the couch beside him, careful not to jostle his injured shoulder. "I'm getting blood on your expensive furniture," she protested weakly. "It's just furniture." His good hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking across her cheekbone. "Are you all right? Did anything happen here? I'm Fina. You're the one who got shot. Barely grazed. And Pavel won't be ordering any more hits." The casual way he mentioned Pavel's death should have disturbed her. Instead, all she felt was fierce satisfaction that the man who tried to kill Valentino was no longer a threat. Dr. Castellano arrived with her efficient medical bag and immediately took charge, cleaning and stitching the wound with practiced ease. It was, as Valentino had claimed, not life-threatening, but seeing him wince as the needle went in made Isadora's chest tight with sympathy pain. "You need to keep it dry for a few days," Dr. Castellano instructed as she finished bandaging. "And no strenuous activity for at least a week." "Define strenuous," Valentino said with a look that made Isadora blush. Dr. Castellano rolled her eyes. "Behave yourself, Valentino. And Ms. Chun, make sure he actually rests. He's terrible at following medical advice." After everyone left, they sat together on the couch in comfortable silence. Valentino's good arm was wrapped around her, holding her close to his uninjured side, and Isadora found herself cataloging details: the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the way his fingers traced absent patterns on her shoulder. "I was terrified," she admitted quietly. "When I saw the news, I thought." "I know." His voice was rough with something that might have been regret. "I hated knowing you were here worrying." "Don't apologize for surviving," she said firmly. "Just don't get shot again. I'll do my best." He pressed his lips to the top of her head, and she felt the tension finally start to leave his body. Pavel was the driving force behind the attacks. With him gone, his father will pull back. The immediate threat is over. Over. She should have felt relief. Instead, all she could think about was that if the threat was over, she had no reason to stay here. No excuse to remain in this strange, dangerous, intoxicating world he'd pulled her into. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now." His arm tightened around her slightly. "Now you get to decide what you want your life to look like." The question she'd been dreading. In the past 3 days, she'd grown accustomed to luxury she'd never dreamed of, to being cared for in ways she'd never experienced, to feeling safe in the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago. More than that, she'd fallen in love with him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was in love with Valentino Torino. Completely, helplessly, irrevocably in love with a man whose world was built on violence and loyalty and the kind of power that came from fear. "I don't know," she whispered. Valentino shifted slightly, turning to look down at her. His green-gray eyes were intense, searching her face as if he could read her thoughts. "Can I tell you what I want?" he asked softly. "Yes. I want you to stay. Not because you're in danger, not because you owe me anything, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I want you to let me love you, Isadora. Really love you, the way you deserve to be loved." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Isadora felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the intensity of emotion in his voice. "You barely know me," she protested weakly. "I know you're brave enough to risk your own safety to save a stranger. I know you're loyal enough to sacrifice your dreams for your mother's health. I know you're strong enough to adapt to my world without losing yourself." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I know that when I thought I might not come home tonight, the only thing I regretted was not telling you how I feel." Isadora closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his voice, the gentleness of his touch despite the violence that had marked his evening. "Valentino," she breathed. "Say yes, cara mia. Stay with me. Let me take care of you and your mother. Let me help you build that restaurant. Let me love you the way you were meant to be loved." When she opened her eyes, his face was so close she could count the gold flecks in his green-gray eyes, could see the hope and vulnerability he was trying to hide beneath his confident exterior. Instead of answering with words, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities and the kind of forever she'd stopped believing in. Valentino went very still for a moment, as if he couldn't believe she was kissing him back. Then his good arm tightened around her, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that made her forget everything except the way he felt against her, the way he made her feel precious and desired and completely safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isadora rested her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." The smile that spread across Valentino's face was brighter than the Chicago skyline, full of relief and joy and something that looked like wonder. "Ti amo," he murmured against her lips. "I love you, Isadora-chan." "I love you too," she replied, and felt something settle into place in her chest, something that felt like coming home. They made love slowly, carefully mindful of his injury, on the enormous bed with its view of the glittering city. Valentino touched her with reverent gentleness, as if she were something precious he was afraid of breaking, and Isadora gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, as dawn painted the sky in soft pastels, she lay curled against his uninjured side, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The external threat might be over, but she was beginning to understand that the most dangerous thing about Valentino Torino wasn't his connections or his reputation. It was how easily he made her believe in happy endings. Isadora woke wrapped in silk sheets and strong arms, morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows to paint everything in golden hues. Valentino's breathing was deep and even against her hair. His good arm curved protectively around her waist, even in sleep. The events of the night before came back in waves of sensation and emotion that made her cheeks warm. She never felt anything like what she'd experienced in his arms. The way he'd touched her, worshipped her, made her feel like she was the most precious thing in his world. The careful way he'd loved her despite his injury, putting her pleasure before his own, whispering endearments in Italian that sounded like poetry against her skin. Valentino stirred behind her, pressing soft kisses to her shoulder that made her pulse quicken all over again. "Buongiorno, Bella," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "How'd you sleep?" "Like I was exactly where I belonged," she replied honestly, then felt heat climb her neck at the admission. His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer until she could feel every inch of his body against her back. "That's because you are, cara mia, exactly where you belong." They lay there in comfortable intimacy until Valentino's phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. He groaned, reaching over her to check the message, and she felt his body tense as he read. "What is it?" she asked, turning in his arms to see his expression. "My mother wants to meet you. Tonight. Dinner at her house." His green-gray eyes held a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy that was endearing on such a powerful man. "Your mother?" Isadora's stomach clenched with sudden anxiety. The idea of meeting the matriarch of the Torino family was terrifying on multiple levels. "She heard about you from Dr. Castellano. Apparently, the woman who saved her son's life and then convinced him to actually rest while injured is someone she needs to evaluate personally." "Evaluate?" That didn't sound promising. Valentino's smile was gentle, understanding. "She'll love you, tesoro. How could she not? But fair warning, she's going to ask you pointed questions about your intentions regarding her young son." The way he said it, with obvious affection despite the intimidating prospect, made Isadora's chest tight with emotion. This was real. Real enough that he wanted her to meet his family. Real enough that his mother was taking an interest in her existence. "What should I wear? What should I say?" "Where she hates me. Wear whatever makes you feel confident. Be yourself, and she won't hate you." Valentino cupped her face in his hands, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. "You're impossible not to love." The morning passed in blissful domesticity. Valentino, despite his injury, insisted on making breakfast again, and Isadora found herself watching him move around the kitchen with easy competence. The sight of him cooking for her, caring for her, felt more intimate than anything they'd shared the night before. They were interrupted by Nico arriving with what was clearly urgent business. His expression was grim as he handed Valentino a tablet showing what looked like surveillance photos. "They took Marco," Nico said without preamble. "3 hours ago, outside his apartment building." "Marco?" Isadora watched Valentino's face harden, all traces of the gentle lover from this morning replaced by the dangerous man who ran a criminal empire. "My cousin. He handles our legitimate businesses downtown." Valentino's voice was ice-cold fury. How did they get close enough? Inside information. Someone told them his route home from the office, his security schedule. This was planned. Isadora felt sick. Another person in danger because of her, because she'd saved Valentino's life and created a war. Marco was family, and now he was paying the price for her moment of conscience. "Viktor Dimitrov wants a trade," Nico continued. "Marco for the woman who cost him his son." "Absolutely not," Valentino said immediately, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Valentino," she started. "No." He turned to her, his green-gray eyes blazing with protective fury. "Don't even think about it. I won't trade your life for anyone's. But Marco is your family, your cousin, and you're mine now too. More than family. You're my heart, and I won't let them touch you." The fierce declaration sent warmth flooding through her despite the gravity of the situation. But the thought of Marco somewhere, probably being tortured, probably going to die because of her, made her stomach churn with guilt. "What are our options?" Valentino asked Nico. "We hit them hard and fast. Full team, coordinated assault on their warehouse in the industrial district. But it's risky, boss. They'll be expecting retaliation. How many men do we have available? 15 of our best. But Victor has maybe 25, and they'll be fortified." Isadora listened to them plan, watched Valentino's strategic mind work as he calculated odds and considered approaches. This was the side of him she'd only glimpsed before, the calculating leader who'd survived and thrived in a world of violence and shifting alliances. "What if we create a distraction?" she found herself saying. Both men turned to look at her with surprise. "I mean, if they're expecting a direct assault, what if you gave them something else to focus on?" "What kind of distraction?" Valentino's tone was careful, not dismissive, but clearly concerned about wherever her thoughts were heading. "Me. What if I agree to the trade, but it was a setup? You could position your people while Victor thinks he's getting what he wants." The silence that followed was deafening. Nico looked between them like he was watching a bomb about to explode, and Valentino's expression went completely blank in a way that was somehow more terrifying than his obvious anger had been. "No," he said finally quietly. "Valentino, think about it logically. They want me anyway. This gives us control over when and where." "I said no, Isadora." His voice was still quiet, but there was steel beneath it that warned her she was pushing against something immovable. "I will not use the woman I love as bait for men who've already tried to kill her twice." "But Marco." "Marco knew the risks when he chose this life. You didn't. You're innocent in all of this, and I will not sacrifice you to save anyone else. Not even family." The absoluteness of his refusal was both touching and frustrating. She could see the logic in her plan, could see how it might save Marco and end the threat permanently. But she could also see the pain in Valentino's eyes at the thought of risking her. "There has to be another way," she said softly. "There is. We go in hard and fast, accept the casualties, and end this tonight." Valentino turned back to Nico. "Set up. Full assault, 2 teams, hit them from both sides. I want Viktor Dimitrov dead before midnight." The planning took hours. Isadora watched from the sidelines as Valentino coordinated with his lieutenants, his strategic mind working through contingencies and backup plans. She'd never seen him like this, commanding and decisive and absolutely ruthless in his pursuit of victory. It was fascinating and terrifying and undeniably attractive in a way that probably said disturbing things about her psyche. As evening approached and the time for dinner with his mother drew near, Valentino seemed to force himself to set aside the business of war. "We should get ready," he said, though she could see the tension still coiled in his shoulders. My mother expects us at 7. Are you sure this is the right time for family dinner? With everything that's happening? Life doesn't stop for business, cara mia. And she's been planning this meal since she found out about you. Disappointing Nana Torino is not an option. The restaurant was elegant but intimate, clearly family-owned and probably under Torino protection. Valentino's mother was waiting at a corner table, and Isadora understood immediately where he'd gotten his commanding presence. Maria Torino was in her late 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with the kind of bone-deep elegance that spoke of generations of confidence. Her dark eyes missed nothing as they assessed Isadora from head to toe. Mama, this is Isadora-chun. Isadora, my mother, Maria Torino. Mrs. Torino rose gracefully, extending her hand with a warm smile that transformed her entire face. Isadora, Karina, I have heard so much about the brave woman who saved my son's life. The dinner conversation was surprisingly comfortable, ranging from food to books to Isadora's family background. Mrs. Torino was charming and intelligent, asking pointed questions, but in such a natural way that Isadora found herself relaxing despite the circumstances. It wasn't until dessert that Mrs. Torino's true agenda became clear. You love him, she said simply, watching Isadora's face carefully. Yes, Isadora replied without hesitation. I do. And you understand what his life entails? The dangers, the responsibilities, the enemies who will always see you as a weakness to exploit? I'm learning to understand it. The honesty felt important, necessary. I know it's not a normal life. I know there will always be risks. Mrs. Torino nodded approvingly. Good. Women who pretend this world is something other than what it is don't survive it. Those who adapt, who find their place within it, can thrive. Valentino reached over to take Isadora's hand, squeezing gently. She's stronger than she knows, Mama. I can see that. Mrs. Torino's smile was genuine now, warm with approval. Welcome to the family, Karina. Take care, my boy. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Isadora felt the weight of acceptance, the responsibility of being loved by someone whose world operated by rules she was still learning. They were almost home when Valentino's phone rang. Nico's voice was tense even through the speaker. Boss, we have a problem. Victor wants to move up the timeline. He says if we don't deliver the girl by midnight tonight, Marco dies. Isadora felt ice settle in her veins. Midnight, less than 3 hours away. Can we move our assault up? Valentino asked, not without significantly higher casualties. We need time to get everyone in position. Then we stick to the original plan. Marco will have to hold on until... No, Isadora interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. I won't let Marco die because you're trying to protect me. Isadora, don't. I'm going to trade myself for Marco. Tonight. And you're going to let me because it's the right thing to do. The silence in the car was deafening. When Valentino finally spoke, his voice was raw with pain and fury. You don't understand what you're asking. These men will hurt you in ways you can't imagine. They'll make you suffer before they kill you, and they'll make sure I know every detail. Then you better make sure your rescue plan works perfectly, she said, turning to meet his eyes. Because I'm not letting an innocent man die for me. Not Marco, not anyone. Valentino stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the moment he recognized the determination in her voice, the certainty that she wouldn't be swayed from this decision. Ti amo, he said finally quietly. God help me. I love you enough to let you do this. The admission felt like victory and defeat all at once. She was about to walk into the hands of people who wanted her dead, but she was doing it with the full support of the man she loved. It should have been terrifying. Instead, for the first time since this all began, Isadora felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The warehouse in the industrial district looked like a tomb in the moonlight, all shadows and rusted metal that seemed to absorb sound. Isadora sat in the back of the black sedan, her hands surprisingly steady despite the enormity of what she was about to do. Valentino had positioned himself in the front passenger seat, close enough to touch, but maintaining the careful distance they'd agreed upon for the sake of the plan. You remember everything? He asked quietly, his voice carrying none of the warmth she'd grown accustomed to. This was the dangerous businessman, the strategic leader who'd built an empire on calculated risks. Stay calm, play scared, give you the signal when I can see Marco clearly, she recited, and trust you completely. The last part wasn't part of the tactical plan. It was personal, a promise between them that transcended the immediate danger. Nico's voice crackled through the radio. Team's in position, boss. You've got 15 men with clear sight lines on the building. Just say the word. Valentino checked his watch. 2 minutes to midnight. Time to go. The walk across the empty lot felt endless. Isadora forced herself to move like someone terrified but resigned, someone who'd accepted her fate but was still afraid. The performance wasn't difficult. Underneath her determination, genuine fear coiled in her stomach like a living thing. Viktor Dimitrov was waiting inside with 4 men, exactly as expected. He was older than she'd anticipated, maybe 60, with silver hair and cold eyes that assessed her like a piece of merchandise. Marco was tied to a chair nearby, his face bruised but his eyes alert and furious. "So you're the little bartender who cost me my son," Victor said in accented English. "You don't look like much." Isadora lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of backbone she possessed. "Your son tried to murder an innocent man. I stopped him." Victor's smile was cold as winter. Brave words for someone about to die. "Where is Torino?" "Outside, waiting for proof that Marco is alive before he leaves." "Smart man." "Too smart, perhaps." Victor gestured to one of his men. "Show her what happens to people who interfere with my business." The man stepped forward, and Isadora forced herself not to flinch. This was the moment. She could see Marco clearly now, could see the exit routes Valentino had described. Time to give the signal. She touched her necklace, a simple gesture that looked like nervousness but would tell Valentino's people exactly where everyone was positioned. The next 30 seconds happened so fast they blurred together. Windows exploded inward as Valentino's team breached from multiple directions. Gunfire erupted, sharp and deafening in the enclosed space. Isadora dropped to the floor as she'd been instructed, crawling toward Marco while chaos erupted around them. Strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her upright, and for a terrifying moment, she thought the plan had failed. Then she looked up into Valentino's green-gray eyes, saw the fierce relief and pride there, and knew they'd won. The silence that followed the gunfire was almost as loud as the violence had been. Viktor Dimitrov lay motionless near the far wall. His empire ended with brutal efficiency. His men were either dead or wounded, no longer a threat to anyone. Marco was conscious and swearing creatively in Italian as Nico cut his restraints. The rescue had been textbook perfect, precisely executed with minimal casualties on their side. "Are you hurt?" Valentino's hands moved over her frantically, checking for injuries she didn't have. "I'm fine," she assured him, surprised to find it was true. The adrenaline was already beginning to fade, leaving her shaky but unharmed. "You were incredible," he said, pulling her against his chest with an intensity that suggested he was reassuring himself she was real and safe. "The way you stayed calm gave us exactly what we needed." "We make a good team," she replied, and felt him smile against her hair. "Yes, cara mia, we do." The aftermath was surprisingly anticlimactic. Nico and the cleanup crew handled the scene with professional efficiency, while Valentino drove her back to the penthouse. The familiar luxury felt surreal after the warehouse, like stepping between 2 different worlds. "It's over," Valentino said as they rode the elevator to his floor. "Really over this time." Victor was the last of the old guard who opposed our territory agreements. With him gone, the other families will fall in line. Over. Isadora let the words sink in, try to process what it meant. No more threats, no more hiding, no more fear for her mother's safety. She was free to choose her life again. But what life did she want to choose? The answer was standing beside her, watching her with those green-gray eyes that saw too much. "Isadora," Valentino said as they entered the penthouse. "There's something I need to ask you." She turned to find him dropping to one knee beside the enormous windows where she'd first watched Chicago spread out below them. The view was the same, but everything else had changed completely. "You came into my life like lightning," he said, pulling out a small velvet box that made her heart stop entirely. 3 days that changed everything I thought I knew about love, about hope, about what I wanted my future to look like. The ring was stunning, a classic solitaire that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. But it was the expression on his face that took her breath away, the vulnerability and love and desperate hope. "Marry me, Isadora-chan. Be my wife, my partner, my heart. Let me love you for the rest of our lives." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Isadora looked down at this powerful, dangerous man kneeling before her, offering her everything he was and everything he had. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, yes, of course, yes." The ring fit perfectly, sliding onto her finger like it had been made for her. When Valentino stood and kissed her, she tasted salt and realized she was crying, overwhelmed by joy and love and the certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Isadora stood in the kitchen of their renovated home, watching her new husband cook breakfast with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else. The morning light streamed through windows that looked out over a garden she was slowly learning to tend, and everything felt perfect in a way she'd never thought possible. The wedding had been small but elegant, held in his mother's garden with family and close friends. Dr. Castellano had walked her down the aisle in place of the father who'd never deserved the honor, and Mrs. Torino had welcomed her into the family with tears and fierce embraces. Her mother's health had improved dramatically with the new treatments Valentino had insisted on funding. The experimental therapy was working better than anyone had dared hope, and she was talking about traveling again, about seeing Europe the way she'd always dreamed. Isadora had started classes at the Culinary Institute downtown, finally pursuing the dream she'd set aside so many times. The other students didn't know their quiet classmate was married to one of the most powerful men in the city, and she preferred it that way. Tonight was special, though. Tonight marked exactly 6 months since the night they'd met, and Valentino had planned a surprise that involved returning to the place where it all began. The bar had been rebuilt, bigger and more elegant than before, with a gleaming new kitchen that made Isadora's heart race with possibility. When they walked in, she discovered her name listed as Partoner, her dream of a restaurant coming to life in a way she'd never imagined. "You said you wanted a place where food was about bringing people together," Valentino murmured in her ear as she stared at the sign. "Somewhere that felt like home. How long have you been planning this?" she asked, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. "Since the day you told me about your dreams." His arms came around her from behind, solid and warm and completely secure. "I want to give you everything you'd ever wanted." "You already did," she said, turning in his arms to look up at the man who'd changed everything. "You gave it yourself." As they danced to the soft jazz playing in the background, Isadora caught sight of their reflection in the bar's mirror. Her wedding ring caught the light, a constant reminder of the promises they'd made and the life they were building together. She thought about that terrified bartender who'd slipped a warning note to a dangerous stranger 6 months ago. That woman had been trying to save a life, never imagining she was actually saving her own. The question that started it all had been simple. Would she do the right thing, even if it cost her everything? The answer had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life she'd never dared imagine. And as Valentino spun her slowly around the dance floor of the place where they'd first met, Isadora knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choice again. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is exactly the thing that saves you. "Ti amo, forever and always," he whispered against her ear. "Forever and always," she replied, and meant it with every beat of her heart. "Now I know about you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where following your heart meant stepping into a completely different world? Maybe you've fallen for someone who challenged everything you thought you knew about yourself, or perhaps you've had to choose between safety and the unknown. Love has a way of asking us to be braver than we ever thought possible. I'd love to hear your thoughts about Isadora and Valentino's journey, and whether you believe that some people are worth changing your whole world for. What did you think about their story?